Welcome to the world's most advanced tier list. So if you guys have been around on this channel for a while, you know that I've been asking you on my community polls where you would rank certain killers. And I've been doing this for literal months now, and we finally have made it to the end of the list. And we got, let's see, we got 363,000 total votes, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So I asked you guys where you would rank the killers, and now I'm going to be putting all of your rankings on the tier list right here. If you guys want me to do more community tier lists like this, feel free to let me know down in the comments below, and then please drop a like because this took literally so long to make. Even this entire setup right here that you see on screen took me at least 2 hours. Also, I'll try to have timestamps in the description below if you want to skip ahead. All right, so let me explain how this works. So on the polls, I had S tier through D tier, and pretty much 75% of the killers got B tier. So I didn't want this list to be a couple in S, a couple in F, and then just all of them in B tier. So I decided to split them up by score. So basically how I did the scores, which you can see on the bottom left, S equals 0.5, A equals 0.4, B equals 0.3, C equals 0.2, and D equals 0.1. And then I multiply that by the percentage of people who voted for that category. So for example, if the killer has 6% of votes in S tier, then I do 6 times 0.5. And then if they have 17% of votes in A tier, then I do 17 times 0.4, and then I add that to the last score. And after I do all that math, I add up all 5 of the scores and get a total score, and then I split up the rankings on the tier list based on score so that it kind of spreads out a little bit. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. And then I also have a most voted for section here where I will put the tier that was most voted for in the original tier list so you can see kind of where it compares on mine. So these are all your opinions, and I'm going to talk about if I agree with them or disagree with them. Most of them I do agree with, but some of them I really don't at all, so I'm not sure what's happening. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. All right, the first killer we have on our list is Trapper. On the tier list, you guys voted for C tier, and personally, I would fully disagree with this. I would definitely put him lower on the tier list because I think he's one of the weakest killers in the entire game. He did recently get buffed, which really helps, but I still think that he's really outdated and still needs a couple more buffs to bring him in line with other killers. However, they reworked a lot of his add-ons and reworked his kit, which makes him way better, but I still think that he is pretty weak, and unfortunately, he's a little annoying to play against, especially if they're playing a basement trapper, but I haven't played him since the buff came out, so he might be way better than he used to be. So his total score ended up being 24.5, which puts him on the F tier. Okay, the next killer on our list is Wraith, and Wraith originally got a B on the tier list, and I would agree with this. I think Wraith is in a really good spot right now. I think he's strong in the right hands, but he's weak in the wrong hands, so you really have to know what to do with this killer, and you have to know how to play him with the hit and run play style if you need to. You need to know how to use his ability for mobility. Jeez. I actually think Wraith is way underrated. They did recently nerf him just a tiny bit because he was kind of annoyingly overpowered at a certain point, but I do believe that Wraith deserves to be in the B tier. He has a ton of add-ons that completely change his style of play. You have speed add-ons, you have add-ons that let him break pallets and break breakable doors and generators faster, and if you pair that with like brutal strength and fire up and stuff like that, you can break things really fast and it's hilarious. But he also is an M1 killer, so you have to know how to chase survivors, and if you don't know how to chase survivors, then you're not gonna have a fun time and you're probably gonna get bullied, especially if the survivors have flashbangs or flashlights, because he is light burned extremely easily. So you do have to look out for that. You don't want to chase people in areas you know you won't be able to get to, but if you have like bamboozle on this character, pretty much every loop in the game should be relatively easy except for certain loops with like a ton of windows. He also has some pretty strong add-ons like the all-seeing ones that let him basically have wall hacks. He was recently nerfed just a tiny bit. They basically made his lunge out of his cloak a little bit shorter, which I think was necessary because it was kind of annoying because it basically didn't have any counterplay. But with that being said, I think he's in a great spot right now, and he receives a score of 32.8 from you guys, which puts him in the B tier. All right, moving on to Hillbilly. In the original tier list, you guys gave him a B, and I don't know where I would rank Hillbilly, to be honest. So personally, I suck with him. Like, I'm so bad with him. And I just think since his nerf and since all the map reworks, I think he's gone way lower in the tier list. I would probably put him lower. I'd put him in like C or D tier because I don't think he's that good anymore. I used to main him and I loved him. This was before he got reworked. He was great. He had a ton of add-ons that completely changed his style of play. He was really fun. There weren't a lot of indoor maps like there are now. Indoor maps basically ruin him because he can't can't use his chainsaw indoors because his chainsaw is meant to traverse the map for the most part. And now with all the graphical reworked maps, it's much harder to use this killer because there's so much like debris everywhere that you can't traverse the map as well. However, he still does have the ability to traverse the map if you're able to, and to insta down people, which is fantastic. But I just don't see why you would use this killer over Bubba, who works on pretty much any map. You guys gave him a score of 31.9, which puts him in the C tier. All right, moving on to Nurse. Nurse very obviously gets S tier. You guys gave her an S tier in the tier list. This, like, you can't even argue with this. Nurse is objectively the best killer in the entire game. She completely ignores walls, pallets, literally anything. She ignores everything. The entire point of this game, she completely ignores. And she has the ability to snowball so easily, so if you're doing poorly with her, you can completely change the tide of the match. Nurse is a fantastic killer. However, she is one of the hardest killers in the entire game to master, which is why she's actually one of the lowest picked killers in the game, as well as having the lowest kill rate. Nurse is a great killer. She's super fun if you learn how to play her because every single hit feels extremely satisfying. But yeah, there's no doubt in anybody's mind that she is the best killer in the game by far, and she got a score of 47.4. which is absolutely crazy. That is super high. All right, moving on to Michael Myers. On your guys' tier list, you put him in the B tier. I disagree with this fully. I think he is one of the worst, if not the worst killer in the entire game. Michael Myers is so bad. And the reason he's bad is just because he's outdated. He was the first DLC character in this game. So he came out years ago and his power pretty much hasn't changed. So they really need to buff this character. I just don't know what they could do because his power is so simple that I think they would have to do like a full-on rework to his character. However, he does have a lot of add-ons that change his kit completely, which I think is awesome. He has Scratch Mirror Myers, which makes it terrifying if you're on an indoor map. He has Tombstone Myers, which is a little overpowered. He has Unlimited Tier 3 Myers. Like, there's so much that you could do with him, which I think is great, and they need to do that for more killers. However, his base kit without any add-ons is just very mediocre and very outdated. You just go to someone and you stare into their soul until you tear up, and it's just kind of boring. He also is a very slow-paced killer because it has a lot of setup for not a lot of payoff. I personally would have put him way lower on the list. I don't think he's even close to an average killer. You guys gave him a 30.0 for a score, which puts him in the C tier. And yeah, I definitely disagree with this. I would say he would be put in the D tier or the F tier, probably the F tier. Personally. Okay, moving on to Hag. You guys put her in the A tier, and I would definitely agree with this. I don't think Hag is strong enough to compete with the S tier killers, but she is extremely strong. However, a lot of people don't know how to play against her, which is why they think she's so strong. But if you have a team of really good survivors who know how to counter Hag, she can be very bad. But I would agree in most cases that she is an A tier killer. She has a lot of map mobility, especially if you use her Eerie add-on, and she also has a lot of add-ons that help her kit and just buffs little tiny things like the range that she can, teleport to, or the length of her little phantasm traps staying up. Overall, she's a very good killer. Instant teleport Hags will absolutely destroy you if you don't know how to counter them, and she can just block off areas and defend areas very well. But a lot of people do find her boring because they think that she just camps all the time and that there's no counterplay. This is true to a certain extent, but if you have a flashlight or if you just crouch, then there's totally counterplay. So I think she's fine where she is personally. And not a lot of people play her actually, but I think she is the second most fun killer in the entire game behind Blight. And you guys gave her a 37.4, which puts her in the A tier on this list. Okay, moving on to the Doctor. You guys put him in the B tier, and I would probably agree with this. I don't think he's very strong, but he's also not weak at the same time. He's pretty average. I would probably put him on the lower side, like maybe C tier on this list, but he can do some work if you know how to use him properly. He's really good at finding people. So if you're against a team of immersed gamers, like a default Nia and a default Claudette hiding in a bush and urban evasioning across the entire map, this killer will come in handy so much. However, he doesn't really have good chase potential because you keep shocking somebody until you finally catch up to them. But survivors can easily avoid the shock if they really try. They can even dead hard through the shock. He is good because he has anti-loop, except this anti-loop is really hard to pull off and survivors can easily avoid it. But then his static blast, which reveals any survivors in your terror radius, is fantastic for finding people and for, kind of map pressure because it has a little bit of built-in slowdown if they get to tier 3, because then they can't do anything unless they snap out of it. But I don't don't think it's enough to warrant a higher placement on this list, and you guys gave him a total score of 31.2, which places him in the C tier, and I think this is a great spot for him. All right, team, moving on to Huntress. You guys put Huntress in the A tier on the original tier list, and I would definitely agree with this. I think Huntress is a very strong pick, especially for someone who has good aim and good predictability. Huntress is very good. If you know how to use Huntress, you can obliterate a team. However, she is a slow killer, so on big maps, she's really hard to use unless you lock down a 3-gen or something. And she also has a lot of pretty decent add-ons to, you know, buff her kit a little bit. They're pretty basic, like you have more hatchets, or your reload time decreases, or you have faster flight speed, which is pretty good. But I don't think that she has enough to warrant an S tier spot. She is not able to compete with S tier killers at all because, you know, she actually has counterplay, which is great. I think counterplay is awesome. Huntress is definitely one of the most balanced killers in the entire game because she has counterplay on both sides. The only thing that's not balanced about her is her fire truck hitboxes, which are just massive. Like, they're just massive, but that's a ping issue. That's not a Huntress issue, so we can't really blame Huntress for that. Huntress, yeah, I think A tier is a great spot for her. She's really fun to play. She's pretty strong. You're able to get cross maps with her. You're able to injure people literally from the other side of the map. Granted, that doesn't happen that often, but you can still do it. You can injure people from really far away, even if it's not a cross map, which is great. You can snowball really easily. You can use Lethal Pursuer with the Eerie Head and get some insta downs right off the bat. It's awesome. I think this killer is one of the best killers in the entire game, just based on like overall design, you know? And you guys gave her a total score of 38.9, which puts her in the A tier on this list as well. Okay, moving on to Bubba, or the Cannibal. You guys put him in the B tier, and I would probably agree with this. He's very strong until you play against good players. Once you play against good players, this killer becomes one of the weakest killers in the entire game, I swear to God. If you don't bring Bamboozle on this killer, you're probably gonna lose, especially if you get a map with a lot of windows like Haddonfield or Larry's, where you literally won't be able to do anything but M1, and then he just becomes an M1 killer. I personally think he's a bit underrated. I think he can do work because he can shred through pallets. He can completely destroy greedy survivors who are trying to greed the pallets, and he can also camp, which is an unfortunate thing. I think they definitely need to figure out a way to fix that, but he can camp, which is very powerful. He can basically secure a kill. Don't camp with Bubba, please. It's really boring and really stupid. Please don't do it. But yeah, I think Bubba's great. I think he's really fun if you don't camp, and yeah, I would say B tier is probably a good pick. You guys gave him a total score of 31.9, which puts him just in the C tier, almost to the B tier. And yeah, I think this is a good spot for him because he is a good killer, but once you get survivors who know what they're doing, he just becomes one of the worst killers in the game. Moving on to Freddy Kreuger, or the Nightmare. You guys put him as B on the tier list, and this is hard for me because Freddy has been nerfed like 7 times within the past 6 months. He has been nerfed to the ground. He used to be an A tier killer because his anti-loop was great. His anti-loop was really boring, but it was really good. He was able to teleport across the map practically whenever he wanted. He had map pressure because he had slowdown with waking the survivors up, and he was also able to synergize very well with a ton of amazing perks like Ruin, Undying, Pop, Tinkerer, even Surveillance is a very good one on him. So he could do work, but he has been nerfed a ton. So now his slowdown is kind of crappy, and he doesn't have that many snares anymore or pallets anymore if you're going that route, which pallets are way more fun in my opinion. Now his add-ons kind of suck, his anti-loop kind of sucks, and pretty much the only good thing about him is that he can teleport across the map, but you know, Demogorgon can also do that, just better. So Nightmare unfortunately has kind of gone down the list over the past few months, and you guys gave him a total score of 29.3, which puts him in the D tier. All right, moving on to Pig. You guys put Pig in the B tier. Definitely would disagree with this one. Pig is one of the worst killers in the entire game. I would have put her at the bottom of the list, hands down, and most people would say the same, so I'm really surprised that she got B tier, but Pig is very bad. Granted, she is underrated. She is still very bad. The reason she's bad is because if you want to be good with this killer, it's up to luck. It's literally up to luck if you want to be good with this killer. Her entire design is based on randomness and RNG. So the good part about her kit is getting slowdown because people have to, you know, go around the map taking off their head traps. But if they get it off the first try, then you don't have slowdown. And that is completely out of your control, which makes this killer so bad. RNG based killers are always going to be bad. If it's in the survivor's control for you to get your power to work. I think that is so stupid. They did just give her a good Eerie add-on, which is kind of cool. I think they need to buff her a little bit or just make her less RNG dependent so that she has medium slowdown throughout the game instead of like low slowdown or high slowdown. I think she should just be more consistent, and then she might be a little higher on the list, but I definitely think that she should be way lower than you guys voted for her, and you guys gave her a 26.2, which actually puts her in the F tier. So a lot of people did vote very low, except B still got the majority, but she did get in the F tier, which I think is perfectly fine. All right, moving on to Clown. You guys voted for C tier for Clown. I would disagree. I think Clown is also one of the worst killers in the entire game. He did get a little bit of a buff with his yellow bottles, but honestly, I don't think that buff really did anything. Clown is a very bad killer. He's actually pretty satisfying to play in my opinion, but he's also very boring to play against because, you know, he just does the same thing on every single loop. He does have some pretty fun add-ons, like he has one that switches his yellow bottle and purple bottles so that survivors get confused. He also has add-ons that, you know, decrease his reload time, give him extra bottles, stuff like that, which is fantastic. However, he's just not very good because survivors can just pre-drop pallets and then never get hit, and then you're never going to be able to get any pressure whatsoever. You guys gave him a score of 23.0, which puts him in the F tier, and I fully agree with that. All right, moving on to Spirit. She was actually just nerfed a lot, which makes her a little bit worse than she was, but she is still extremely strong. You guys put her in the S tier, and I would completely agree with that. She is worse than Nurse, but she is in the S tier. I would fully agree with this. She's very strong. She basically has no counterplay, but after the last nerf, she does a little bit now. But yeah, she's hands down the second best killer in the entire game. She has a ton of add-ons that are very strong, some add-ons that make her faster, some add-ons that give her faster recovery speed. She now has new add-ons too, which sound kind of fun. I don't know how strong they are, but she has one that like her husk will explode and, you know, block windows or something, which sounds pretty sick. But yeah, she's definitely the second best killer in the entire game, and she got a score of 46.9, which puts her in the S tier just behind Nurse. And yeah, I would fully agree with this. I don't think anyone would disagree. She's also very strong because she's so easy to use. Literally someone with 200 hours can pick her up in 4K easily, like no doubt in my mind. Whereas Nurse, if you don't have like a solid 1000 hours on this game, it's going to be very hard for you to consistently get 4Ks with her. Okay, moving on to Legion. You guys put him in the C tier on the list. I disagree with this. I would have put him way lower. I think he's one of, if not the worst killer in the entire game. He has the ability to injure a lot of people really well, which on paper sounds great. Like you can just injure people a lot, and then it's technically slowdown because then they have to heal. But if you're playing good survivors, they're just not going to heal, which basically means that your power makes them focus on gens more. Do you see how this is a little redundant? Your killer power makes the survivors do their objective better and more efficiently, which doesn't make any sense. And without your power, you're nothing. You're literally just a basic M1 killer, so you have to be very good at chases. Legion is fantastic against survivors who will heal, especially if they have self-care. But if you're playing against a good, solid team of survivors, you're not going to be able to do much because you have to really chase them and really know what you're doing in chase to be able to get any pressure whatsoever. And I also just don't really understand why you would play Legion over Plague, because Plague does the same thing but better. She keeps people injured, but she also has more abilities, so she's literally just Legion but way better. So I don't really understand the point of this killer, but Legion is okay. Legion has a lot of add-ons that do help a little bit. Eerie Pin is great. There's a couple that reduce your recovery speed, which, you know, honestly doesn't do that much, but I would definitely rank Legion pretty low on this list, and you guys gave Legion a total score of 23.9, which puts him in F tier. Fully deserved. This entire F tier row, completely correct. Alrighty, moving on to Plague. You guys put Plague in the B tier, and I would agree with this. She's definitely better than Legion, so I'm glad you guys put her in B instead of C. And I think she has a lot going for her, especially now after her buff, because they did buff her. She was kind of bad. Like, she was an average killer before the buff, don't get me wrong, but she just had a lot of like really buggy issues with her that made her kind of bad. So like sometimes you would charge the meter to a certain percentage just to, like, you know, do a quick puke tap on a gen, but then it wouldn't do anything, but it would still slow you down, but it wouldn't puke. So you're just slowing down for no reason, and then you have to do it again, and it just wastes a bunch of time for no reason. But they did fix that. Now whenever you charge your puke, it'll always go to the minimum threshold before puking, so you're never gonna have to worry about that again. But she also had random glitches where, like, you'd puke on someone, they would make the sound of getting infected, but then nothing would happen. Like, they literally wouldn't be infected at all, which is super annoying and super frustrating, and I think they fixed that. I'm not actually entirely sure, but they also made her speed up a little bit while she's charging her Wild Purge, and they just added a ton of tiny little quality of life buffs, which I think will make her way better. And she also has some pretty decent add-ons as well. Some of them allow her to spawn in with an extra pool of devotion so that she gets her power better. Some of them allow her to charge her meter faster, which is very good. So she has a ton of pretty good add-ons that really help amplify her kit. I think she's a pretty middle of the road killer with a lot of counterplay and a lot of well-balanced decisions. And you guys gave her a score of 32.5, which places her in the B tier. And I would agree with that. I think that's a good spot for her. All right, we're now moving on to Ghostface. You guys put Ghostface in B tier, which I would probably agree with. I think he's a little weaker now, but he definitely is a pretty solid average killer with a lot of counterplay. They actually just buffed him a tiny bit, and now he has less recovery speed, but then they also nerfed the recovery speed add-ons. So now you can kind of play around with other add-ons because the rest of his add-ons are terrible. Ghostface is in a pretty good spot right now. Ghostface is a little bit weaker than I'd probably like him to be. He's the only legitimate stealth killer in the game base kit that can actually like hit you out of their stealth, besides like tier 1 Myers, but you should not be hitting people in tier 1 Myers. And I think this game just needs more killers like that. But his power is pretty basic, but it's really easy for him to just not get any use out of his power whatsoever. The good part about this killer is it's easy to get hits with his stealth, and then if you're able to stock them to 99%, then you can get a lot of insta downs without really having to chase them. But it's very difficult to manage all of your stock because if you hit someone before they're fully stocked, their stock meter goes completely back to zero. So you really have to pay attention if you're going to be using the stocking ability. There is a playstyle where you just use your ability for stealth while you're in chase to down them easier in chase. I personally like that style better because you're able to make some fun mind games with the ability and kind of freak out the survivors a little bit and then down them really easily so that you can get more pressure and more snowball. But then the trade-off for that is that you're never stalking people, so you're never going to get any insta downs. But he's an overall pretty decent killer. He can be very fun to play against. And you guys gave him a 30.9, which puts him in the C tier. And I would probably agree with that. I think he's definitely weaker than Plague and Wraith, but definitely a decent killer. All right, moving on to Demogorgon. You guys put him in the B tier, and I would agree with that. I think he's high B tier because he's pretty strong if you know how to use him properly. I think he's great. I think he's a really fun killer. Super balanced, super well designed, has a lot of things going for him. He's able to teleport around the map, so he has some good map mobility. He's able to down people pretty quickly in chase if you're not able to avoid his shred. So he's great at shack, great in long hallways, able to shred through pallets. He has a lot going for him, but his power is also very counterable, which I think is fantastic. I think he's another very good designed killer, just like Huntress, where he has counterplay, but he's still pretty strong. And I definitely think he's a bit underrated because he can lock down loops very quickly, as well as being able to teleport around the map to pressure the map if you have like pop or other gen slowdown perks or anything like that. Demo is a pretty solid pick for a killer, and he is unfortunately getting removed from the store soon, so you're not going to be able to buy him. And I think this video is actually going to come out after he's removed from the store. So if you don't have him, unfortunately, you won't be able to buy him. But for those of you who do have him, you know that this is a very fun killer to play. And you guys gave him a total score of 32.2, which puts him in the B tier, and I would completely agree with that. I even wouldn't mind if you guys put him in the A tier, but B tier I think is a pretty good spot for him. All right, next up on the list, we have Oni. You guys originally put him on the A tier, and I would fully agree with this. He's a very, very strong and powerful killer, but he definitely does not compete with, you know, Spirit and Nurse. However, he is fantastic. He's a fun killer. He's well balanced because he has a ton of counterplay, and he has a ton of add-ons that are very good too. Some that make him dash faster, some that make survivors drop more blood, stuff like that, which is great. The reason he's not S tier though is because without his power, he basically is just a regular M1 killer. So he can't do anything. So if these survivors are very cautious at the beginning of the game and they just pre-drop pallets and they don't let you get a single hit for like a few generators, it's going to be very hard for you to come back from that because you won't be able to get your entire power. However, once you get your power, and if you pair it with Infectious Fright, it is very strong and you are able to completely change the match. Like you could be at 0 hooks with 5 generators done, get your power for the first time and kill everybody. You'll get like 7,000 points at the end of the match, but you still will be able to win. Oni is literally just a stronger version of Hillbilly. Like he has practically the same things going for him, except Oni doesn't bump into walls and he can flick really easily and do a lot of mind games because he doesn't bump into walls. But then again, it is a limited time ability, so if you're not able to, you know, pressure survivors with your M1 to be able to get the blood orbs spawning around the map, then it's going to be very hard for you to compete. But with that being said, you guys gave him a 38.0, which puts him in the A tier, which of course I would agree with. Okay, next up we have Deathslinger. Deathslinger just got nerfed to the ground, and I did this pull before his nerf, so you guys gave him a B. He's probably a little bit lower now because he is much harder to use because you have to like, you know, wind up your aim instead now, which is gonna suck. Like he's gonna feel so bad to play. So basically this scoring is before his actual change, and he was a decent killer. killer. I think a B tier is pretty good. He had a lot going for him. He had a very strong ability in chase that is essentially uncounterable, but he's just very bad outside of chase, which makes him a not very good killer overall. He was one of the weakest designed killers when he came out, but now he's just worse because they nerfed him without buffing anything to compensate. So he is a little more counterable now, which makes him less good in chase, but at the same time, his chase potential was the entire good part about him. So he's much weaker now, but he does have some good add-ons that kind of amplify his ability a little bit. He has some that decreases reload speed, some that can insta-kill if you hit a far shot. Some of his add-ons are completely worthless, like the ones that speed up your walking speed while you're aiming down sights. Most people quickscope anyway, so that's kind of useless. And he also has other useless add-ons like the ones that make his terror radius small when he's ADSing. Just kind of weird stuff like that. But he does have a few like the reload ones or like the ones that, you know, make mending last longer to give him more slowdown. But he is a pretty decent killer, and you guys gave him a total score of 31.1, which puts him in the C tier. Okay, next up is Executioner. You guys put him in the A tier, and I would definitely agree with this. I think Executioner is a very strong killer if you know how to use him. He is one of the harder killers to use though, because you have to, you know the maps to predict movement. You have to be able to be putting your gulag juice all over the place. You have to be able to know when to cage them, when not to cage them. You have to think whether or not you should put your sword down to use your ability or to just M1 them. There's a lot going for him that you have to keep track of in your mind at all times. But if you're able to do this, he is a very strong killer because he practically ignores loops because he's able to hit through walls. If you pair him with like I'm All Ears, which shows the auras of survivors after they vault, then it's much easier to predict their movement. So that's one of his strongest perks. So he's very, very good in chase, and he also has the ability to completely mitigate very strong meta perks like borrowed time, decisive strike, stuff like that. So his base kit is pretty good. His add-ons are practically worthless. Like pretty much every single one of them doesn't do anything helpful at all. There's literally one add-on where you have to stand on your Trail of Torment and it'll make you oblivious after 2 seconds. So it's like a worse version of Insidious. It's so bad. It's literally so bad. But yeah, I think Executioner is a great killer, and you guys gave him a total score of 38.0, which puts him in the A tier, and I would fully agree with that. Okay, next up on the list, we have Blight. You guys put him in the A tier, and I would pretty much agree with that. I'd put him like the highest of the A tier. He's barely edging on the S tier, but Blight is a fantastic killer. I actually really like this killer. He has a lot of counterplay, assuming you're not J flicking or lag flicking or grilled cheese flicking, whatever, you know, whatever the techniques are nowadays. But he is really counterable if you know how to position yourself as a survivor, which I think is great. I think he's a great design. He is very strong. He has a lot of add-ons that are very strong as well, like Alchemist Ring, where it resets all of your charges when you hit somebody with your power. You have turn rate add-ons, you have recovery speed add-ons, stuff like that. I feel like every one of his add-ons is pretty good, and he just synergizes so well with the meta right now, which is Ruin Undying Pop, because he's so fast that he can get people off gens very quickly, and he can also get 2 gens very quickly to pop them if they got rid of, you know, Ruin and Undying. But overall, this killer counters the whole W meta, which is great because he's able to catch up to survivors after he hits them, which cuts down chase time so much. The only downside to him is that in loops, it's pretty difficult to use his power, so he kind of becomes an M1 killer. However, he's extremely strong outside of these loops, which makes him so good. You guys gave him a total score of 39.7, which just barely puts him in the A tier. Okay, moving on to the twins. You guys put the twins in the B tier. I legitimately have no idea where I'd put her because I've played against her maybe 3 times in my entire life. Nobody plays her. I don't know why. Actually, I do kind of know why, because she's kind of boring. But I feel like you guys kind of underrate her. I think she's much stronger than you guys give her credit for. She's another one of those killers, kind of like Deathslinger, where she's extremely oppressive in chase, but then really bad outside of chase. Because if you think about it, she spawns in her baby, goes to down someone, and then she has to go out of her baby all the way to the downed person, pick them up, then hook them. And by the time it took you like 40 seconds to do all that. So it's just, she has really bad time efficiency, but she's just very strong in chase. But you guys gave her a total score of 30.5, which puts her into the C tier. And I think you guys severely underrate her. You know what? I'm starting to notice a lot of people in the C tier, so I'm going to change these values a little bit just to kind of evenly spread it out a little bit more. Okay, so now that we have these new values, this actually puts the twins in D tier, which I fully disagree with. This puts Ghostface also in D tier, which I would disagree with that. And then this also puts Shape in D tier, which I agree more with. And then I believe those are all of the changes. Yes, they are. Okay, perfect. Okay, now it's a little more even, which is great. Okay, we just have 3 more killers to go. Next up is the Trickster, and you guys put him in the B tier. I think he's a little bit worse than the B tier. I probably would have put him in the C tier. Trickster doesn't have any counterplay in chase, so his counterplay is just holding W and just going to different loops, which is very boring. He's probably the most boring killer to face. He is a 4.4 killer with no map pressure at all, no map mobility, so he's really bad outside of chase, which makes him weak overall. He's very good in the 1v1, but very bad in the 1v4, which is why I personally think he would be a little bit lower on this list. You guys gave him a total score of 29.5, which puts him him into the D tier, and I would definitely agree with this. I think D or C tier is probably a good fit for him. Okay, there's 2 more killers to go. If you guys made it this far, you are absolutely amazing. For the 3% of people who did, go in the comments and type 3% so I know who made it this far in the video. All right, our next killer is Nemesis. You guys also gave him a B tier rating, and I would definitely agree with this. I think Nemesis is a solid mid-tier killer. He has a lot going for him. He has zombies, which are able to pressure the map, but they're based on RNG, so sometimes they can do nothing. But these zombies can be very good. They can zone survivors while you're in chase. They can get survivors off gens, which if you have ruin will regress the gens. So he does synergize with a lot of perks, which is great. And his normal tentacle ability is also practically uncounterable. However, it does take 3 hits to actually down someone, which makes it a little better because then it takes a longer time to actually down the survivor fully, even if they don't have counterplay in chase. But yeah, Nemesis is pretty good. He's very strong in chase, has a little bit of map pressure with the zombies, just a little bit though. They're not amazing. And he also has a tiny bit of slowdown with survivors vaccinating. So it's great. You guys gave him a total score of 32.4, which puts him in the B tier on this list, and I would fully agree with that. And last but not least, we have Pinhead, the most controversial killer on this list because of the NFT situation. But you guys put him in the B tier, and I would definitely agree with this. I think he is a pretty average killer. He has some very good things going for him, but they are hard to use. He's able to really slow down people in chase, and he's also able to do his chain hunt thing, which affects every single survivor on the map. Chain hunt makes it so that they're not able to do any of their objectives until somebody finds the box. So they're not able to, do gens, heal each other, cleanse totems, open exit gates, none of that, because they'll just, keep getting pierced by these hooks. And that is a very strong ability. On top of having an anti-loop ability, he also has the ability to teleport to whoever is solving the box. So he has a tiny bit of mobility, which isn't fantastic, but he is able to get from one point to another depending on where the survivor is. But overall, I don't think his power is incredibly strong, but it is pretty strong. And you guys gave him a total score of 31.2, which places him in the C tier. I would probably disagree with this. I would probably put him in the B tier, but that is the end of the list. We do have little Miss Bird Lady over here, but she's also not out yet, and she's probably gonna have a lot of changes from the PTB. I just scheduled a poll for you guys to rank her, but most people in the community, from what I'm gathering, would either put her in A tier or bottom of S tier because of how good she is. But with that being said, I'm gonna reorder this entire list based on the scores so that the left is the strongest of that row and right is the weakest of that row. So we got Nurse, and then Spirit, and then Blight, and then we have Huntress next, and then we have Oni, and then Executioner, and then Hag. And then we have Wraith, Plague, Nemesis, Demo, Hillbilly, Cannibal, Doctor, Pinhead, Deathslinger, Ghostface, Twins, Shape, Trickster, then Freddy, then Pig, then Trapper, then Legion, then Clown. This is really interesting. I don't think Clown is the worst killer in the entire game, and I also don't think that Myers is better than Trickster. This is a very interesting list. I would probably put Hag above Pyramid Head, and I'd probably put Wraith at the bottom of B tier, and then Hillbilly at the bottom of C tier. I mean, Twins I would definitely put like way higher on the list, but Ghostface is probably the best of this row. I'd probably put Trickster above Myers though, and Freddy above Myers as well. But that is the community tier list that you guys voted for. If you guys enjoyed this video and want me to do more community tier lists, feel free to drop a like and subscribe if you're new. We're getting very close to 100K subscribers, which is insane. Your guys' support has been absolutely incredible. I mean, 363,000 votes for this is absolutely mind-blowing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to join my Discord server and find other people to play with or talk to me or ask me any questions, feel free to go down in the link below and it'll take you there. And I think that's all I have for you today. So I will see you all in the next one. Peace.